I would like to welcome Mandy Dobosenski. Chances are, if you have been in this involved in this industry at any level, you've come across the wonderful Mandy Dobosenski. She's been our first returning champion to the Clicks to Riches show and making her second appearance. She was on our Amplified big show that we had here back in September, and we just absolutely love Mandy here on the show. So Mandy, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Thanks so much for having me. It's great. I'm buried under a foot of snow here in Minnesota, but other than that, it's lovely.
Well, that sounds like summer. Only a foot of snow, Minnesota. So we're just glad you could take some time out from shoveling your driveway and join us on the show. But I just want to start out by asking you a little bit of an icebreaker question. And you folks out there can play at home. Give us the answer in the chat, or at least your best guess at the answer. So Mandy, if you're ready, are you ready for our trivia question?
Fire away.
Okay, so in celebration of International Women's Day, in what year was the first International Women's Day celebrated? Was it 1886, 1911, 1951, or 1988? Now, before you answer, I'm going to read it one more time and give our folks at home the opportunity to put their answers into the chat. Was it 1886? Was it 1911, or 1951, or 1988? Okay, are there any answers coming in, Leah?
Slowly.
Okay, well, your opportunity to find out if you were right or not will come exactly after we hear from Mandy. So Mandy, what is your answer?
Oh gosh, do I get to phone a friend?
No, you do not. You do not get to Google. You have to rely on your instincts on this one.
Let's go with 1988. That sounds like a good year.
Oh, that is a good guess, but unfortunately, that is not correct. It's actually been around for over 100 years. It started in 1911. Okay,
oh, wow.
So there we go. We've been celebrating women on International Women's Day since 1911. So, Mandy, I've just got a couple questions for you. Again, thank you for joining us on the show. But can you tell us what inspired you to start your journey with POD?
So my journey has sometimes felt a little bit different because I was already running a handmade business full time. And so I had already left my corporate HR world back in 2021, took that leap into entrepreneurship to run a business that I had originally started in 2017. So when I started with print on demand in 2022, I was primarily looking for an alternative creative outlet outside of, my handmade business that took up a lot of my time. Before landing with print on demand, I tried all sorts of other things, again, kind of along those creative lines, digital products, Amazon KDP. But what I really discovered in that process and kind of learned about myself is that I'm someone who loves creating tangible things. So having an actual physical product-based business. And I also discovered in that process that making more inventory and taking on more inventory and more fulfillment was not going to be the right answer at all. Sounded like a good idea at the time, was not the right answer.
A true side hustler at heart. That's something I can totally identify with. Mandy, you and I are simpatico on that. But I love your tagline, freedom from fulfillment. Can you take us through exactly what that means?
Yeah. So like I said, my handmade business was already highly successful at that point, but doing production and fulfillment of anything yourself is extremely time consuming. It's labor intensive and it's expensive. I loved it, but it's a deep commitment. And so, at that point, growing that business, I didn't have a desire to hire people into my handmade business or outsource production. And with products like mine, with that would have had to have been the next step if I wanted to keep scaling and bringing in more income into my household and building that business further. So instead, I pivoted. And so with print on demand, I can sell as many products as I want and never have to touch a single thing. And so, a great example of this is that I've had viral moments in both of my businesses. And the fundamental differences in each of those experiences is remarkable. After a viral moment with my handmade business, I literally vowed to never wanting to go viral again as a solo business owner. And it sounds weird, but trust me, once you've experienced that and had to do it yourself, I did not want to ever have to do that again. Money is great and all, but it's not everything. And that was a perfect example. But a viral moment with print on demand I had last year, when it comes to fulfillment, not a problem. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's still plenty of other work like customers and occasional issues and follow-up. But in terms of fulfillment and getting things in the hand of customers and being able to scale in a different way, it's like a night and day difference. And so for me, that is the true power of freedom from fulfillment, because it's also the freedom to scale and be able to bring in, again, more income into our household without having to scale a business that was no longer, in a place where it was scalable. And so ultimately, by not having to worry about fulfillment or inventory, I was able to grow multiple streams of income. And I was even able to retire my husband from his IT job to help me and offset some of the work. So for me, I always say that my handmade business got me to my full-time entrepreneurship role and opened that door for me. But freedom from fulfillment and the addition of print on demand is what keeps that door open. I will also say that I'm somewhat of a poster child of that multi-passionate entrepreneur. And so I like that I get to do more than one thing. I'm not, stuck in just one place or doing one thing. And so I'm now to the point where I still do some work with my handmade business. I've scaled it back, scaled back my product line so that I'm not having to spend as much time there. I like that I can have a balance of products that I'm still creating for customers that I've had for years on that side of things, while also getting to lean more fully into this other path of freedom from fulfillment that I'm just, again, completely obsessed with. Everyone chooses their own path, and so people do these, full-time or do different things, but this is what's worked really well for me, and being in this, season of now middle-aged mom life, it's the perfect place to be.
What an inspirational and heartwarming story. Thanks for sharing, Mandy. I want to stick with this theme of freedom, though. Speaking of freedom, what kind of freedom does this industry offer to women in particular?
I think the big things that come to mind are freedom of time, freedom of opportunity, and freedom to, again, like I said, scale, all with the ability to really kind of choose your own adventure, if you will, and all of this, for me, it comes back to what print on demand offers, especially for women, is opportunity, the opportunity to create something of your own, even if you only have small pockets of time to work on it, whether you've got a 9-to-5 career or are a busy stay-at-home mom that can only make it happen during the nap time hustles. You have the opportunity to build income on your terms, the opportunity to turn your creativity into something that can actually pay the bills, or, as I always say, at least covers those Target runs that start as just a few things, but always manage to turn into a full cart of items you didn't know you needed. I have a large percentage of women in my own community, many of whom are career women exploring a new path, lots of stay-at-home moms, women who are rarely traveling across the country, and women in retirement or nearing retirement who are looking for some extra supplemental income. There's just so much diversity in where women are at and how they are looking into, have print on demand support them in their financial pursuits. And for me, what they all have in common is that this business model allows women the ability to explore, again, building their own business without the headache of inventory, without the headache of packing materials, or like myself, a garage full of unsold products. They're building businesses that they would not perhaps have otherwise been able to do if they had to do it in the traditional way when we think of a product-based business. I think that's why I personally, as you can tell, get so passionate about it and truly love it, because I love that it creates the freedom to build out an entire product-based business that I personally love, as big or as small as you want it to be, from wherever you are, and make money while leaving the traditional barriers behind. And in all of this, what I really love is that at the end of the day, print on demand isn't just about selling products. It's a means to an end, but it's about building something that's yours. Running a business is about having, that vision for your future and being bold enough to chase it, right? Whether it's making an extra $500 a month for grocery bills or saving for a family vacation or scaling to six figures or beyond, if that's what you want to do, this business gives you those tools to make it happen without waiting for permission or following someone else's path and making someone else's dreams come true. You get to do that for yourself. You're in control of your time, your creativity, and your growth. I always say, we've all had those bad bosses. There's no boss in this other than yourself. Sometimes I grumble about my boss, but then it's like, it's me. I'm the boss. I'm the problem. But no boss, no inventory stress, just you, your creativity. And like I said, a world full of opportunity. It goes without saying that it's still a lot of work. I don't want anyone to ever have that misconception. But at the end of the day, the only limit is how far you're willing to go and the work you're willing to put in to truly make it happen. I'm not a millionaire by any means. That was never my goal, and it's not what I need. But I've achieved what I have just by doing print on demand, basically part-time. So I always tell people, if I could do that in a part-time capacity, so can you. And if you eventually want to put in a full-time level effort for it, well, just imagine, what kind of opportunities are there.
Yeah, and I want to get back to what you were saying about those numbers here in just a minute. But I wanted to highlight one thing that you said, because I think it really stands out and is something worth repeating, is that you don't need anybody's permission to start and be successful in this business. And that's a message that I would really like to resonate, or at least stick out from what you were saying. But Mandy, if you don't mind, can we step in the Wayback Machine and go back to the beginning when you started in this business? Because I want to ask you a question that I just love asking successful people. Now, back in the beginning, can you tell me about some of the significant obstacles you had to overcome, some of the mistakes you made, and then how you managed to overcome all that?
Oh my gosh, so many. I fell into, it's the biggest one, I fell into the common trap of shiny objects. Anyone in my group has heard me say that a million times. They know exactly what I mean, those dang shiny objects. The beauty of print on demand is also a double-edged sword. It's the sheer, the variety of products available, but that can also be kryptonite if you're not careful. I wanted to put my designs on all of the things, and I got super frustrated in the beginning because that, of course, as I now know, doesn't generally work, especially if you're a beginner and just starting out. And so I was designing and putting, my designs on things that I wanted. I was creating designs that I liked or that my mom liked, not necessarily what paying customers were actually wanting or where there was, more importantly, demand. So my first shop, complete transparency, was a total failure and had no real strategy. So I tried again after really digging in to figure out why it wasn't working and figuring out a different strategy and focusing on just one product and putting more emphasis on identifying what worked, what didn't, improving my designs, and then scaling out with additional products once I had mastered those other important things first. That's when I started to really make some headway. And so for anyone that listens to my new podcast, next Tuesday's episode, I'll actually take an even deeper dive. It's actually all about this. But I would say the other obstacle with this was that I'm not a graphic designer. So my designs for quite a while were pretty terrible. But the more I did it and practiced, the better I got. And I think it's important to understand that it's okay being a beginner. Nobody starts out as an expert. I guarantee you, none of the other lovely ladies that we talked about earlier started out as experts. None of us did. It's that willingness, though, to never stop learning and constantly improving along the way. That's what gets you there.
Definitely. I can't agree with you more. You'd be surprised how many merchants I have conversations with that sort of get over their skis and don't lay that foundation for their business first without defining their target customer, their target niche, identifying their particular needs and how you can address those with your products and your designs. And then how you can even identify a target customer and doing your competitor research and things like that. And then, and only then, can you point your business in the right direction. So it's a very powerful message, and I really appreciate you sharing that with us. Since your success, what sort of strategies or decisions that you have made that you believe was pivotal, that's not a word, is it? Pivotal in reaching your financial success?
I'd say there are a few key ones. One of them, kind of what you alluded to, is focus, and so for me, one niche at a time, one product at a time, and focusing on just, one strategy, like zooming in, putting on the blinders, tuning out the noise, right? We are in an age where we have access to so much information, which is great. But if you're not careful, it can also be super overwhelming. It's arguably the number one thing that I hear from other sellers and members of my community. If you're listening to 10 different people with 10 different strategies and trying to implement all of them, you're going to end up with a big old mess. And that was my first shop, right? That's exactly what I had. So for me, when I went to that next shop that went on to be my biggest, I focused because all those different strategies can and do work. It's not that any of them are wrong. It's that you can't do them all at the same time. And definitely not if you were constantly ping-ponging back and forth without giving any of it time to grow and provide data for your decision making. So one of the things is deciding on what you're focusing on and then committing to it. You might need to change down the road, and that's okay. So for my example, I had to resist the temptation to plaster my designs on everything and get laser focused on getting good and mastering that one thing at a time. So in my case, I committed to one single well-researched product. For me, it was sweatshirts that I started out with. And then I focused on one well-researched niche at a time, which I believe started out as different types of nurses. I committed to fully building them out with several intentional listings before moving on to the next. And again, gave myself permission to really ignore and start tuning out anything else that wasn't part of that strategy, even when it sometimes felt like I might be, missing out on, different things. And over time, I expanded out and added on additional products and niches. I consider that a general store now, but I did it with intention. And only after I felt more confident with my design process, with my SEO and optimization, and had proof in the form of also getting sales. I also started thinking less about my target audience as just a niche, but more about them as a customer identity. It's a nuance, but for me, thinking about them slightly differently made some difference there, as in, who are they? What's going to resonate with them? Is there special lingo or design elements that only they would really understand? What kind of gifts might someone buy for this person? I started, staying away from just generic trends, which was another big mistake I made early on, and focused on things that people get passionate about, right? Get excited about, that they connect with. And so instead of, the pretty patterns or the generic things, I focus on things that as humans, we identify with. And so nowadays, I pull typically from one of 5 big themes. It's typically hobbies, professions, life events or milestones, pet ownership, and personal passions. So think like faith, advocacy, awareness, things like that. And in most cases, if it's not falling within one of those things, it's not going to create as strong as a connection. So typically that's not the path that I go. And again, not that you can't be successful with any of those other strategies that talk about, trends and, different designs. It's that this was my focus and this was my strategy. And this was how I avoided chasing those, shiny generic trends that can fade a lot faster over time, and product businesses, right? Products need to either solve a problem or meet a desire. Connection is that psychological factor. Customers buy with emotion and that desire for the product, especially when you think of like t-shirts, right? We don't always actually need that. It's not necessarily solving a problem, but it's meeting, thinking about how can I meet that desire, and connect with them on how they feel about it. And, then the customer justifies it, right, with the logic. But it's that connection is when they buy with that emotion. And so that connection is what's making someone, scrolling on Etsy stop and go, oh my gosh, I have to have this. Or, oh my gosh, this is so my brother John. This is, what allows even simple text-based designs to do really well on places like Etsy, myself included, so that was a big part of that. I'd say another, strategy in this was building habits that lead to success, not overnight, but that compound over time. So researching consistently, discovery scrolling consistently, and this is a phrase, a term that I use when it's actually, staying in touch basically with what's selling and where there's demand. So I think of it as discovering these things, listing consistently. I set a listing goal so that I could work towards, again, something tangible and within my control. And then along the way, it's paying attention to the data. This is something that I did very differently in my main shop, the one that blew up, compared to my original very failed shop. I paid attention to not only the market and search data for clues of what to create, but then also my own shop data as I got it with the more I listed. So, if a design or a product or a niche is working, I doubled down on it and kept making more of it. And if something isn't working, you keep learning and you adjust. And so, out of all of this, one of the biggest pieces of advice that, I can ever give to someone is to never stop developing not only your skills, but also your mindset as an entrepreneur. I've been starting and stopping businesses since 2011, right? Side hustler at heart. But in all of this, and even just looking back in all of that, not just print on demand, I tend to think of entrepreneurship as 10% skill, but like 90% mindset. You can learn skills, you can get better at designing, you can get better at SEO, and you can get better at marketing. But if your mindset isn't in the right place, if you let frustration or self-doubt win, that's where you get stuck. And so we have to be able to push through those moments of frustration and setbacks as part of our strategy in order to stick with something long enough to actually get good at it. We have to recognize what we have control over and what we don't. We have to remember that while we may not always have all of the answers, all of the resources, we can develop resourcefulness and curiosity when we hit those roadblocks or setbacks. I'm a firm believer that everything is figure outable. The beginning of starting a business is shiny and new and exciting. And I know that's why a lot of people are here, right? And the success you eventually reach is a great motivator. It's incredible. But that messy middle is where we spend most of our time. So it's important, again, as part of that strategy, to really work on that mindset piece of it as well. And so, I actually launched a new podcast recently called Thrive Anyway to be able to talk about exactly that, because I think it's just that important, but not talked about nearly enough as part of that journey of achieving, not just success, but sustainable success, and to keep coming back to your business day after day.
Wonderful. Truer words have never been spoken, Mandy. I love that message. And I hope you folks out there that are starting your journey were paying attention, because one of the biggest mistakes I see people making in the beginning is trying to do too much too soon and not taking the time to get good at the basics. So very powerful message, Mandy. And I think we have time for one more question before we get to the Q&A portion of today's discussion. And just a quick reminder that if you do have some questions for Mandy or any of the topics that we've covered today, put those into the chat right away. away, and our moderator, Talish, will go ahead and collect those, and we'll address those in just a second. But Mandy, I want to talk about numbers. So because reaching financial milestones is pretty cool. Are there any sort of income achievements that you have achieved that you're particularly proud of?
Yeah, definitely. So numbers are always part of the story, right? They're what motivated me and got me excited in the beginning. So, some of my own exciting, vanity metrics, if you will, are, I reached 100K revenue in less than 10 months when I first started, when I shifted my strategies with this, that newer shop that I pivoted to. Once I changed my strategy and figured out what works, I had kind of what I alluded to earlier, a viral moment last year where I reached almost 100K in a single month, though, with my single highest ever day being 430 orders in one day, which again would have broken me had these been something that I had to fulfill myself, right? I reached the top 1% status on Etsy, and I will break 500K in revenue this year. So that's less than 3 years if you're following the math. And while, yes, only a portion of that is profit, the same thing is true for my handmade business, right? And I got to this level with print on demand way faster than I ever did with my handmade business because of this just being a much more efficient and scalable business, But for me, the things outside of money are that I get to help so many other people find their own joy and success with print on demand because of what it's allowed me to do. I get to see other people in my community reach 100K and 300K in their businesses, their first 100 sales, their first 1,000 sales. I get to do what I love every single day by running a product-based business that isn't going to run me into the ground. And I get invited onto platforms like this to share my story and inspire and encourage others much in the way that I was in the beginning to help others choose their own path and build something that they're proud of. And for me, kind of at the end of the day, when I think looking back, in my family, I'm now the breadwinner in my household by choice. And not enough women get to say that. I get to do all these different things. And I built something with my own two hands. And as a woman and as a mom, that's kind of a really cool and empowering thing to be able to say. So, it took a lot of blood, sweat, and tears along the way, but it's definitely something that I'm really proud of.
That's a beautiful story, Mandy. Thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate it. And I know our audience out there appreciates it as well. And I'll tell you what, at 500K, next time we're hanging out, you're paying for dinner, all right?
You just invite me back to Latvia and I'll pick up the bill for you.
No problem. All right. Well, now, since the theme of our show is finding those voices out there that our audience can learn from, how can they join the Mandy community?
So certainly I have my YouTube channel, Simply POD with Mandy. I also have my own private community and mentorship group called Simply Thrive. And so that can be found through my website, simplypodmandy.com. And as a special treat for listeners today, if anyone's interested or curious about it, I'm including a 15% off coupon just for Printify listeners for this. If you decide to join and be part of that or want to check out more. But we are all about, in my corner of the world, we focus on simplicity and just being very encouraging and helping people make progress and cheering each other on along the way. We do a lot of live calls every month, talk about, trends and what to sell and things like that. So it's really a beautiful community. And I'm so proud of everyone that's in there. It's just an amazing group of humans. And so we'll make sure we have that information in there for you, again, if anyone's interested. But otherwise, always tons of free content. Again, on my YouTube channel, I have a brand new podcast called Thrive Anyway on all the major podcast channels, as well as my YouTube channel. You can find it there too. So hopefully you will be able to check that out.
That's great. However you prefer to consume your media, you can certainly connect with Mandy and be part of her community. If you wanted to sign up to as part of Mandy's community, use promo code Printify, and we'll have all this information not only in our chat but also in the video description as well. Thank you again, Mandy. But let's go ahead and take some questions from our audience. Leah, what do you have for us?
Yes, we've got quite a few good questions today. So the first one, Linda Blatchford asks, what's the benefit of one product at a time? I do Jewish holiday table linens and want to offer napkins, aprons, and matching items.
I'd say, the whole theory behind one product at a time is getting really good at designing it, right? When you think of print on demand, anytime you start adding on more products, especially if they are coming from different providers, you've got to think about, different pricing levels. You've got to make sure you've got each individual product priced correctly and competitively. You've got to do research for each of those to make sure that they're going to land with the audience. There's different shipping profiles. And so you've got to make sure that you're setting all those, different nuances up. So for me, part of my strategy is keeping it simple and reducing overwhelm. That's like two of the number one things for me that's always been kind of embedded within my strategy is kind of funneling it down, getting really good at the basics, starting there to reduce that overwhelm. And again, really focusing on getting good at that one product, the design process, the shipping process, reaching customers, validating that customers are ready and willing and are buying those products within that niche. And then as you, again, as soon as you start to see that interest, absolutely double down on it. So if you've got, table linens doing well and you can take that design to something else that's going to be similar and appeal to a similar customer, absolutely go for it. I think of that strategy, you look at what's selling. Same thing with apparel. If you've got a design that's selling on a t-shirt, put it on a sweatshirt. If it's still selling on that, then explore, with something giftable like a mug or a tote. Work well for that design that's now proven as well. Same thing, on kind of that niche customer identity side of things. If you are exploring a few different niches and you notice that one is really taking off, double down on that, make more products and designs for them. So it's really, that whole concept of one product is really about, especially as newer sellers, getting good at the process, getting comfortable with it, and, finding that path where you do have something that's working and that you can then start scaling and building out from there. So that's kind of where that concept comes from.
Right, because at the end of the day, especially if you're just starting, you got to decide what that flagship product is going to be. Like, what are you getting in this business to sell? You get really good at that, it's going to be so much easier to branch off thereafter. So thank you very much for that. Leah, what else do we have?
We have another question for Mandy from Rise Daily. Where do you sell? Etsy mostly, or do you sell on Shopify as well?
Yes. So for print on demand, I've pretty much always done Etsy. I've dabbled a little bit with Shopify. My handmade business is entirely on Shopify. And so I'm very familiar with that. But again, the beauty of print on demand and, especially on the Etsy side of things, again, at least for me, was that I didn't have to do some of all those other things that I've done with my handmade business. So with Etsy, I don't, my shop's there. I don't do social media. I don't drive, I'm not driving traffic there. I'm not, doing anything like that. I'm just getting really good at selling on Etsy, and it's doing the work for me. And it's just continuing to sell once I got that momentum there. And so that's why I really enjoyed that. I certainly think that for those who are wanting to really build a livelihood around their print on demand, have that be their focus, much like with my handmade business, absolutely the benefit of getting started with Etsy, using that as almost like a good testing ground to experiment, to leverage that marketplace, to do some of that research, figure out what's selling and what people like and which product is working, and then take the good stuff when you're ready to branch out and diversify and have another stream of income, and then build out a Shopify where you can still leverage that traffic that's already going to Etsy and built in on Etsy, you can still leverage that traffic while still building out a Shopify down the road if that's where you choose to. And then you know what's really working. And you can have, what I would say is your best stuff on Shopify if you choose to start branching out, which again, if you plan on building around this and having, a bigger brand would definitely be what I would recommend. Again, once you've kind of got that stability and feel good about where things are at with an Etsy shop.
Okay, wonderful. And I think we have time for 2 more quick questions.
Yes, a question from T-Shirt Wonderful. What's a good number of products for each niche?
The $1 million question. So I think, again, this is one of those where there's a million strategies out there. Do you have to have 1,000? No. What I would say, though, is that for me, I had a fair amount of volume. So when I first started my print on demand, that shop, I was leading into Q4 of that year. So I set a really aggressive listing goal, and I ended up having about 700 total listings by the time I got into Q4 that year. And so I had probably half a dozen or so niches, well, probably more than that if you factor in sub niches. And so for me, it was about that iteration, not just volume for the sake of volume. I always go back to I'm listing and I'm setting listing goals to stay consistent and to learn and to get data. That volume of listings. So I typically say if you're starting out with a niche and building from the ground up, get a good 15 to 20 different listings in there before moving on to the next one and exploring the next one, because then you can start to get data from those initial listings while still creating and being consistent. But that gives you enough, again, to get some data, test it. But then from there, like I said, that iterative process, it's not just make a bunch of listings and just throwing it, spaghetti at a wall. I'm still researching those designs. I'm researching those customer identities, and I'm putting in the best effort that I can in those. But it's also to iterate. It took me a lot of really bad listings right in the beginning and a lot of really terrible designs that I thought were fantastic. Not a one sold. But the thing is, I can tell you that, but once you experience it and you go through that process and you go through the motions of creating, practicing, learning, every time you create another design and another listing, it's the next opportunity to learn. So it's less about total number and more so about that iterative process to build in some volume so that you can get some visibility and do some testing and see what works. But also with that, you're learning how to get better and better along the way. So like I said, if you're looking for a number, I always recommend anytime you're building out a niche, if you're going for a general shop, get at least a solid 15 to 20. Ideally, I had probably closer to 30 to 40. And then, like I said, you can lean in from there based on what the data is telling you. So if you look at, my shop today, I still have some of those niches that I had some, original batch of designs, but they didn't really sell as well. So some of them are still there. Some of them sell sporadically, but the ones that really took off, once I learned and saw what worked, those I then kept pushing out even further. So I have, multiple hundreds of listings in some of those very specific niches that I know are selling well, because not only am I then getting more visibility, but I get repeat customers from those because I'm constantly creating new and different things that bring them back to my shop and that I become more known for. And even the Etsy algorithm starts to pick up on some of those things too and can help get your shop with the right visibility too.
Yeah, that's one of those questions that can have like a million different answers depending on your philosophy and, from what angle you're
so
coming
true.
at it to, there's no one right answer. But yeah, and just take it like this, folks. You're going to learn so much from creating listing number 1 by the time you create listing number 20 or 30. And then by the time you get to listing 100, you're going to look back at who you were when you were just getting started, and you won't even be able to recognize yourself. You're going to learn so much just by doing.